We start with a curly-haired lawyer woman ripping off Spider-Man by dramatically talking about the importance of power and responsibility. Turns out she was just practicing for her upcoming trial speech, and her name is Jen Walters, attorney at law. We then meet her two supporting characters, Nikki and Dennis, and only one of these dopes is a walking sexist misogynist caricature type, what seems to be written by middle-class millennial feminists without a shred of talent. But I'll let you figure out which one that is. Nikki is a paralegal and is totally not insufferably annoying in any way. Not even when she talks a mile a minute and makes cringy jokes, which ain't even real gags, but just inane interjections. Anyway, Jen then turns the camera and breaks the fourth wall, because reasons, and randomly talks to us in the audience before showing us her backstory in the form of a flashback. Seemingly, Jen was out on a road trip with her cousin Bruce, aka the actual fucking Hulk, because he apparently has nothing better to do than go out driving in a car with his little cousin while surrounded by god-awful green screen, even after having just saved the universe from an alien god who killed everyone with a sassy finger snap. Anyway, after an unsatisfying and bullshit expo dump about how he's fixing up his arm off screen and created a device to keep himself in human form, they soon talk about more important issues, like how it's totally sane to eat crisps with a pair of chopsticks, and if Steve Trevor ever touched a boob before he went back in time and died an old man. Suddenly, though, a giant fuck-off spaceship appears right in front of them because reasons. And distracted by irrelevant thoughts about whether Captain America is an incel or not, she somehow doesn't see it and thus reinforces the problematic stereotype of women being bad drivers and almost kills herself and her cousin by flipping her car down a little hill. In the worst recreation of a Fast and Furious stunt sequence since Richard Hammond gave himself brain damage by trying to show off on Top Gear back in the day. Anyway, because she's a strong female character, she's practically fine, and crawls out of the wreckage to go save the actual Hulk, who's stuck in his seatbelt like a riot gag. And in a shocking twist what no one could ever see coming, a drop of his blood mixes with her blood, and she suddenly transforms into a fuzzy CGI reflection. Lol, don't you just hate it when that happens? Then Bruce has to roll about in the grass while straining in pain and turning green, just like me at 2 AM on Taco Bell night. Anyway, Jen later wakes up in a small wood, barefoot and dishevelled, and looking like she's just stepped out of an I Spit on Your Grave audition. She stumbles into a bar through the back door, and instead of calling for an ambulance, instead goes to check herself out in the mirror because she's totally a woman and priorities, bro. Suddenly, though, a bunch of stunningly diverse women burst in, and instead of panicking and asking if she's okay or needs help like sane and normal people would, they instantly assume she's just been dumped by her boyfriend and set about trying to make her look fabulous again, despite clearly presenting like a straight up rape victim what needs urgent attention from both the medical services and police department. So naturally they fix her up and send her back out to the streets totally alone, where she ends up standing on a corner looking like a legit floozy touting for business. And when a group of concerned men come along wondering why she's out here on a Jack Jones looking dazed and confused whilst dressed as a tart, she suddenly snaps at them when they come over to say hello. Bizarrely, her eyes turn green and she swiftly turns into that She-Hulk bird with PS2 level graphics, and is about a millisecond away from drop kicking a black man in the balls, before some fella straight up rugby tackles her to prevent her getting sued into oblivion for bringing a black man to his knees. Which is lucky, because I don't think Portland can survive another 6 months of rioting. The next morning, Jen wakes up in a tropical island paradise, which is weird and totally unfair, because last time I almost got done for a hate crime, I woke up in an overnight jail cell, and not a 5-star resort in the middle of the fucking Maldives. Talk about female privilege. Anyway, after finding nobody around, she goes down into a dark basement completely alone, even though the last girl to do that ended up being impregnated by her own father for 20 years. Seriously, have these people learned nothing? Luckily though, she finds Bruce down there now in Hulk form, and not any kind of mustachioed sex pest. And although he concedes to having kidnapped her and brought her against her will to some remote location with a dark and gloomy lab in the basement, it's all cool because he totally rang her parents and told them not to worry or call the police, because she's totally in safe hands with a giant green troll monster with no other witnesses around. He proceeds to explain how she got this way with some fancy technical jargon, but really, all it boils down to is a sincere warning not to receive unauthorised blood transfusions on the side of a dual carriageway. Anyway, Turns out that now she's totally a Hulk, he's been looking into her blood, also against her will, and that's why his arm is perfectly fine now. How convenient. Alas, although he's used her body juices to fix himself up, he reckons he can't do anything for her, and she also can't have one of those inhibitor devices to stay as Jen because it was a prototype specifically calibrated to him. And also they're well expensive, and she's just pretty much Jen all the time anyway, so she don't even seem to need it. A little later, he starts experimenting on her like some sort of lab rat in a silly hat, whilst trying to trigger her anger and fear. And instead of just saying she stinks of BO and is going to miss the RuPaul Drag Race finale because he totally kidnapped her, he simply goes and launches a bunch of spiky blades directly toward her. So naturally, she turns into that giant green troll woman with PS2 level graphics, and proceeds to tear up the gaff whilst giving me a raging lob on. Bruce quickly realises she doesn't have an alter ego and is still consciously Jen in her mind, and he's totally not bitter or jealous about it, given he spent over 10 years figuring out how to control his condition and battling with his literal id for control over his body, while she takes to it straight away like a bigger Mary Sue than Ray Bleeding Skywalker. But regardless, Bruce still takes her through the super technical training what he's devised over the years, which consists of doing a bit of yoga and trolling her in her bed every morning. Quite bloody literally. He then shows her his panties during a montage because reasons, before she beats him in a rock throwing contest despite being half his size and having smaller arms than Amy Schumer even after a KFC binge. After being humiliated by his own cousin being better than him at everything they tried just because she has a fanny and is written by out and proud misandrists, he channels the feelings of the audience by pushing her off a cliff and finally getting her to shut up for 30 seconds. Unfortunately, she pops right back up, and so he proceeds to get her drunk, which just makes her even more obnoxious and insufferable, before telling her old life is over now that she's ingested his blood and become a giant ugly troll creature. But she can't accept that because she spent thousands on her law degree, which is even more of a piss take given President Biden just totally went back on his debt forgiveness promise, so she now totally regrets having wasted time on this island and also voting Democrat. He reckons it's just too dangerous to let her back into public life, because if she ever gets angry, like say when chipping a nail, she'll totally Hulk out worse than Michael Bay when an explosion isn't big enough to be heard 10 miles away, or when he can't get the right angle on Megan Fox's cleavage. This is where Jen unironically womansplains anger to the actual fucking Hulk without any sense of irony or self-awareness, and states that she's actually a master at controlling anger because she does it every time her misogynist colleagues undermine her at work, or when she gets catcalled in the street by skanky builders, or even when a bunch of blokes come over to say hello outside a bar and ask if she's okay. And hilariously, she says all this while simultaneously not controlling her anger and half turning into her Hulk form. So, after having a worse meltdown than a Hillary Clinton fan on the 2016 election night, she straight up steals his car and somehow runs over the actual Hulk, despite him previously being able to stop a giant mechanical space worm going 100 miles an hour back in the OG Avengers flick. She then proceeds to smack him up harder than Meghan Markle does Prince Harry when he forgets to apologise for his white and royal privilege every morning, and makes Brucey Boy look more cut than Justin Trudeau at a feminist rally. And although he does get a licking, she then gives him a pounding headache by slapping her hands together to produce a little boom. And after being further humiliated when she pelts him with a bunch of green testicle looking things and thereby literally serving his balls back in his face, he straight up rugby tackles her, which is so effective he breaks his own bar. This is when Jen gets her first real experience of a fourth wall break, because reasons. And instead of being horrified at being able to see me scratching my balls and scoffing Krispy Kremes whilst I wait for this crap to finally be over, she just shrugs it off and helps her cousin repair his outdoor pub. And I'm sorry, but I really do have to ask in all seriousness, what the heck is Jen supposed to be seeing when she talks to us? I mean, why doesn't she panic and tell Bruce that their whole lives are a lie and they're actually part of a fictional TV show written by lazy millennial feminists? And why include this gimmick if it doesn't have any impact on the plot or story? What does this show even actually gain from all these wall breaks? I mean, just because it was in the comic books doesn't mean it has to be here, as clearly it doesn't work for this version of the character and serves no practical purpose. Oh well, it's a Marvel project, so screw thinking and shit. And I'm still laughing at the fact that the Jeep still works, even after being rammed into the actual fucking Hulk. So she leaves, having trashed almost everything she ever touched at Bruce's once 5-star resort, kinda like what every Marvel writer does to the MCU lore when they take on any of these shows. And I'm especially looking at you, Loki. Then we cut to the trial, where we will finally get a taste of just how good a lawyer Jen is, and what the wickedly talented writers are truly capable of. Unfortunately though, Jen doesn't even get past her opening statement before an XT4 presenter randomly bursts through the walls like that anthropomorphic juicy fella from back in the day. Nikki takes her shoes and tells Jen to go get green already, before proceeding to show the worst edited sequence since literally any frame in Resident Evil: the final chapter. Or Taken 3, I guess. And before you can say, what the fuck was all that about, the juicy woman what hates walls is totally down for the count. And Jen goes back to lawyering, looking like she's just finished shooting the sequel to that I Spit on Your Grave flick. And that's it. That's the first epi. Well, actually, there is a post-credit sequence where Bruce confirms Steve Rogers totally rogered a fair few groupies in his time, along with a cringy final gag that made me groan harder than my wife when I told her I was already finished barely 15 seconds into the end of Date Night. But anyway, what an introduction. My favourite part was where she starts the episode as an unlikable, obnoxious twat who's naturally good at everything. But then after going through an incited incident that totally and literally transforms her, she ends the episode as an unlikable, obnoxious twat who's naturally good at everything. Oh, wowzers! These writers are geniuses! Anyway, on to episode 2. We start with a bunch of news reporters naming the new green superhero who came out of the blue as the She-Hulk, as Jen enters a bar to loads of fans cheering her new name. And before you can say, how could that sweater possibly fit both her mortal form and Hulk form so perfectly, she proceeds to have a drink, whilst a super toxic sexist misogynist lawyer colleague comes over and reckons she only got herself run over and Hulkified for the publicity, and to make him look bad. Her friend Nikki brings over some more drinks, whilst this Dennis geezer walks off to talk to a girl what he unironically refers to as it. And this is what feminist millennial Hollywood writers apparently think of straight white men who are even moderately successful in the workplace. Anyway, speaking of straight white successful men, an older member of that despised demographic comes over and tells Jen that she's totally fired because she saved the jurors' lives and they'll naturally be biased toward the client what their literal saviour represents. If only they could replace the jury with 12 fresh-faced candidates to start over again in a week or two. But nah, that would be too easy. So they just give her the sack for being a total liability. Man, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Hey, Jen? After the main titles, we see a montage of her going through job interviews and getting rejected harder than my alcoholic uncle's liver transplant, before her mum reminds her about that dinner they were supposed to have tonight, which just about almost tips her over the edge. At said dinner, everyone initially tries to avoid the subject before her cousin Ched immediately teases her about being fired, and the conversation turns to mundane things like Ched getting promoted at work and her dad buying a new TV. And not, like any sane family would discuss, how the fuck she's coping being an overnight celebrity and losing almost everything she ever worked for just for saving people's lives. They're also more interested in setting her up on dates, and also wondering where Hawkeye's arrows go when he fires them up into the air and stuff. Eventually, her dad takes her into the garage and finally asks how she is mentally, although doesn't seem to ask about the physical toll it must take on the human body to constantly change into and maintain a giant muscular frame with all those throbbing veins, which surely must lead to excess strain on the heart and increased risks of strokes. But apparently this doesn't even seem to cross his mind, nor does he give her any advice on taking out a life insurance policy. Later, she has a quiet drink by a Jack Jones at a bar, whilst the executive partner at the opposing law firm says he was totally impressed at the case she laid out against them after she got done beating up the XT4 presenter who seems to have a massive grudge against walls. So she instantly takes the job without even reading over any legal papers or contracts, so God knows what kind of deal she's signing up to. And hilariously, her lack of due diligence hits her square in the face when she turns up on Monday morning at her new place to find they've only hired her to represent superhuman cases, and also want her to be the She-Hulk 24/7. Fuck me, her poor heart and veins. Luckily, the clothes she was wearing all seemed to fit her pretty well, despite them not being spandex and despite her having no clue that she was going to be transforming today. Before she does some more of that fourth wall breaking, and presumably she watches me spill frube juice all over my man titties whilst watching her do her thing on her own show. Then a handsome colleague from across the hall greets her, and because the feminist misandrist millennial writers hate men with a passion, they've named this geezer after a fucking breed of dog. And this pug fella gives her a welcome basket as well as a map showing the route to the best bathroom to poop in. And I promise you, I'm not making this up. Later, her boss gives Jen her first case, which is to represent the actual abomination in court. And before you can say, ain't that a massive conflict of interest given this client flat out tried to kill her own cousin a few years back, she actually says that she can't represent him because it's a giant conflict of interest given this client flat out tried to kill my own cousin a few years back. But he just shrugs and says,
"Nah, it'll be fine."
Eventually, Jen comes face to face with her cousin's would-be murderer, and apparently he's now become a full-on white supremacist. Or at least that's what leftists keep telling me is a secret hand signal what the far right use to dog whistle to other racialists. I always thought it was just the OK symbol, but whatevs. Apparently though, he's now a changed man, and more cucked than a Twitch simp buying fart jars from a cam girl. He does, however, give a pretty reasonable explanation for why he did all them bad things years ago, and simply states that there was a giant green monster on the loose, and his commanding officers told him that they need to take it out for reasons of national security and public safety, and it totally wasn't anything personal or nothing. And he only went nuts and smashed up the city because her own government pumped him full of experimental super soldier serum and turned him into a literal abomination. And he totally gets emotional when he talks about how he thought he was the good guy and somehow the out-of-control Hulk became an actual Avenger whilst he ended up rotting in jail for trying to protect the public and do the right thing. And before you can say, that's actually pretty fair and reasonable and I can kind of sympathise with this guy now, he goes and spoils it all by busting out some of his homemade haikus and reading worse written poetry than an emo teen on Tumblr back in the day. The next morning, Jen phones up Bruce to ask if it's okay to represent that bloke what totally tried to straight up murder him 10 years ago, just so she can get him out of jail to write more poetry. Or something like that. Bizarrely, the creature what becomes a giant green monster when he's angry seems totally chill about this proposal and says he's totally not holding a grudge against this fella because they're essentially pen pals now after Emil wrote him a heartfelt letter and a haiku to boot. Man, pussy old Hulk is worse Hulk. And we end on Jen calling her boss to accept the job, whilst the TV tells us that the Abomination's escaped his jail cell and is off shooting some scenes for the Shang-Chi movie what came out last year. And that's it. That's episode 2. Well, unless you count the post-credit scenes of Jen's dad making her help out with the household chores whilst in Hulk form. But they're shit, so we won't. Now onward to episode 3. We start with Jen storming into Emil's prison cell, mad about him lying when he said he doesn't transform into the Abomination anymore, and hilariously exposing how poor her listening skills are when she's reminded by her own client that he specifically said he chooses not to transform into a moody, veiny monster. Unlike my girlfriend, who seems to do it naturally about once a month. Although he totally left his cell without authorisation despite being a convicted prisoner of the state, he reckons that because he returned of his own free will that makes it alright then. Which is strange, because when I tried that as an excuse after climbing out of my bedroom window when I was grounded as a naughty teen, my mum just gave me a slap and said now I can't go to the prom either, and I've got to stay home to do the hoovering for another 2 weeks. Lame. Anyway, he totally cucks and tells Jen it was Wong what let him out of the cell, and so she asks that Nikki bird to track him down so she can totally tell him that letting dangerous literal monsters out of their high security prison cells willy-nilly just ain't fucking on, son. Then Jen contravenes all the rules that my driving instructor always told me to stick to by taking both hands off the wheel at the same time, just to randomly talk to camera about how she totally knows that we can't wait to see Wong. God, no wonder this bird keeps crashing her motors. I mean, seriously. Last time she stopped paying attention to the road, she became a giant fuck-off green troll for fuck's sake. So you think she'd be pretty paranoid about losing concentration on the road just to talk to me in my birthday suit whilst trying to lick loose yogurt drops off my nips? Anyway, the important crucial information she has to impart is that this totally isn't the type of show where they just shoehorn in random cameos for fan favourites just to keep us watching, before she then rattles off a list of all the cameos we've already had within 3 episodes, including the OG Hulk, the magical Wong, and the actual Abomination. And we know from the trailers that even fucking Daredevil's about to be thrown at the wall to see if it sticks in a few eppies. After the opening title card, we're treated to a compilation of apparent internet trolls complaining about how they took something unique about the Hulk and gave it to a woman because reasons, and how they don't actually have problems with female heroes but would prefer feminist writers to make their own original ones, instead of copying and subverting already established male heroes. And this seems to be presented as a cringy parody for us to mock and laugh at, despite them appearing to make totally legitimate points as far as I can see. Then we're reintroduced to Dennis, who still seems to be the most stereotypical and hyper-exaggerated version of a male chauvinist pig I've seen outside of anywhere that hosts Piers Morgan, who says he totally don't want to work with this giant green troll bird on a case, though totally seems up for tag teaming the super hot caramel totty lass what also works in their division. But he talks to her like a piece of meat, and so she storms off and is never seen again in this epi. And let's be real for a second. This infantilised writing of a toxic straight white male saying to a stunning and brave chocolate lady that, quote, I couldn't possibly talk to a 10 about embarrassing man stuff, is just completely cartoonish levels of script writing. And my god, what kind of utter cuck would sign up for such a role? I guess this cardboard cutout of an actor has zero dignity and must just be happy to be in work. I mean, imagine reading this script and auditioning for a role where you have to mug yourself off every week. I hope the damn paycheck was worth it, my guy. Anyway, apparently the case in question is this Dennis Bukowski fella is being sued by his ex-girlfriend, who also just totally happens to be a shape-shifting light elf from New Asgard, aka the aliens from the Thor movies. And if you haven't seen Ragnarok, then good luck in following any of this shite. Hilariously, he thought he was dating something called Megan Thee Stallion, but she totally catfished him by doing a bit of grifting while shape-shifting. And if you're like me and haven't a Scooby what the fuck a Megan Thee Stallion actually is, then Jen helpfully clarifies in the dialogue by explaining that she's a, quote, multiple Grammy Award winning megastar, and not, as I initially thought, a transgender horse with identity issues. Suddenly though, a giant gaping hole appears where lots of men go in and out, which turns out to be an interdimensional portal, and not, as you may have initially thought, a rather crude description of AOC's arsehole. Anyway, Wong straight up admits that it was him what busted out the literal abomination, all because he wanted to face off against a worthy opponent for his final exams in becoming a supreme sorcerer guy. And before you can say, why are they writing Wong as some random alien who seems to have no knowledge of nor respect for human laws, he straight up says that he demands that Emil not be punished for his own flagrant disregard of the justice system, all because he's a magical supremacist. Or some shit. Hilariously, she's totally shocked when he says he ain't got time to erase everyone's minds either, and she says good, because that would be totally unethical, despite him just illegally busting out a mass murdering literal monster from a jail cell who was convicted in a court of law. So she tells him the least he can do is show up to Blonsky's parole hearing to speak in his defence. Meanwhile, Dennis thanks Pug for taking his case and then leaves, but then walks straight back in and does a bigger 180 than Tony Hawk on shrooms, when he says actually he totally wants to drop the case, bro. And before you can say, well, this totally ain't the aforementioned shape-shifting magical light elf pretending to be Dennis at all, it turns out it is the aforementioned shape-shifting magical light elf pretending to be Dennis after all. Wowzers! Such great writing. Back in Emil's high-security cell, what any old Asian bloke apparently walks in and out of nowadays, Emil shows off his 7 culty whores. I mean soulmates. Before the parole board hilariously tried to decide if a literal monster who just got caught breaking out of prison multiple times and also violating their strict orders of not turning into the abomination again should ever be freed. Why they even bothered to turn up and indulge this bloody farce, I don't know. Jen then tells them to hold their horses, because she totally has a witness that's able to clear her client's name. However, the dimension-hopping supremacist Asian is somehow late, and so the Gamini parole board leader guy says this case is a slam dunk, and her client is more screwed than an aging porn star trying to move into a legitimate career. Luckily though, there's also a stunning and brave junior black lady on the board, who soon goes full libtard and asks about the actual abomination's feelings and shit. Naturally, Emil jumps at the chance to cry and whinge and self-flagellate like a right cack, and says his 7 culty whores, soulmates, who he met through the prison pen pal program, and yes, that is an actual line of dialogue and not just me making a joke, are willing to help him set up a meditation retreat on that plot of land he still owns. But the gammony baldy boss bloke don't seem too impressed though, and just when everything looks like it's about to go tits up for Blonsky boy, Wong Wong appears, and the supreme sorcerer whose job it is to protect the space-time continuum unironically says that he simply lost track of time. Elsewhere, we catch up with a B-plot as Dennis is in the small claims court suing that shape-shifting magical light elf bird for 150,000 big ones, after defrauding his toxic ass by pretending to be a trashy pop star what no one under the age of 25 has ever heard of. The judge reckons that's totally fair enough, and impersonating trashy pop stars what no one under the age of 25 has ever even heard of just ain't fucking on, son. So her motion to dismiss is denied, before the shape-shifting magical alien light elf thinks it's somehow a good idea to then impersonate the actual judge, and cringily cosplays as a gender and race swap Judge Judy. Or some shit. Back at the parole hearing, Wongers concedes that he took Emil out of the cell by force, but it was totally Emil's choice to return, despite him bizarrely offering a convicted killer and actual monster asylum in Kamatage, because reasons. But that's not good enough for the toxic Gammon, and he worries that letting out a man who uncontrollably turns into a rampaging monster is probably not going to be good for public health. So naturally, Emil puts their minds at ease by turning into that aforementioned abomination bloke and showing them that his transformation is totally under control, bro. Before the entire parole board wet their kicks, as this super toxic white gammony bloke tries to hide behind the stunning and brave black lady because comedy, bro. And also writer's misandry. Then the parole board gather themselves and realise that Wong just admitted to colluding with a criminal and being an accessory to an actual prison break. And before you can say, he's not a naughty boy, he's just a fan of Wentworth Miller, they gear up to arrest him before he jumps back through AOC's arsehole. I mean a black gaping hole where lots of men go in and out. The next day, Pug puts Jen on the stand as a witness to her ex-colleague Dennis's case, as they used to work together at the DA's office. She then goes on to denigrate him and his chauvinistic tendencies and says he was totally the victim in this case, as he's absolutely the kind of ignorant donut that can't tell a real-life trashy pop star what no one under the age of 25 has ever heard of from a magical shape-shifting alien light elf taking advantage of his relentless ego. So naturally, Dennis wins his case after the writers use it as an opportunity to mock and humiliate a successful straight white man because reasons, and said trashy pop star what no one under the age of 25 has ever heard of randomly pops up IRL, in the cringiest cameo since my floater popped back up on Taco Bell night. Later, the parole board make their decision and decide that the literal monster who once killed a bunch of peeps and has seemingly beguiled 7 whores into dressing like naughty pagan milkmaids who follow his every word like some sort of cult leader can absolutely be let back into the general populace. Huzzah! Although they do stipulate that he must wear an inhibitor at all times and refrain from turning into that giant fuck-off monster ever again, or else he'll totally be hauled back to prison where a small Asian will continue letting him out of his cell now and again for jolly jaunts over to the other side of the world. Because reasons! To celebrate her success in such a high-profile case, Jen goes on the local news channel as She-Hulk, and the male host only seems to be interested in where she got her name from. Though for some reason, his first question isn't, why do you feel the need to state your pronouns in your actual fucking name? So, after never finding out why she's called She-Hulk but her cousin isn't called He-Hulk, we cut to Jen walking up to her apartment before a bunch of randos accost her and she transforms into that giant green troll thing. And because it's not enough to humiliate 2 blokes in one episode, she proceeds to smack 7 shades of hell out of 4 more poor saps before one of them tries to poke her with his pointy tool. Steady? But she says no means no, bro, and almost shatters his spine against the wall before they run back to their van and bemoan how she crushed his little gizmo, leaving it more crooked than a Reuters fact check. Then we cut to the end titles, before we're treated to a mid-credit scene featuring yet another pointless cameo from that trashy pop star what no one under the age of 25 has ever heard of, this time doing some cringy twerking. And before you can say, my god, how many poor VFX artists were involved in the making of this nightmare sequence? No, literally, because I want them all rounded up on a list and jailed indefinitely for producing such weaponised cringe. Jen straight up simps over the gender-confused horse person and the episode finally cuts to black. And that's it. That's episode 3. But man, I can't believe what I've just seen. Did they really just bring in Megan Thee Stallion just to move her batty up and down in the end credits?
Fact check. That's true.
You know, when they said Miss Stallion was joining the MCU, I thought she was going to suit up and face off against the likes of Kang and the Abomination. Turns out she was just recruited for a pointless cameo to play an Abomination and then never be seen again. Also, this woman cannot keep a straight face in any of her scenes, probably because she knows herself how much of a self-parody pantomime the whole thing is. I mean, when even Redditors know that this is going to be top-tier shit post-fodder for years to come, you know you may have gone too far, son. And yes, preach it, sis. Screw those annoying YouTubers who make videos pointing out all the objective story flaws and character assassinations, and endless misandrist diatribes and hypocritical feminist rants and numerous cringe scenes. It's just like my mum always used to say. If you can't say anything nice about a show, make a half-hour video complaining about it on the YouTubes.
LOL!
Anyway, why are they also assassinating Wong here? What has my man done to deserve this shit? The geezer is all about law and order and sticking to the rules. But here, he casually states that he broke out Abomination from jail just to prove himself in a cage fight, and it's all played for laughs for some reason. Lol, Because why maintain character consistency when you don't even respect continuity characters anyway? This is not Wong. In fact, Wong was so far out of character in this ep that I was half expecting this guy to turn out to be the old lady elf the whole time. Like, why was he late to the trial? Why did he lose track of time? Again, this is a character who's a stickler for the rules and regulation and constantly tells Doctor Strange that he's a reckless loose cannon. So why do the writers suddenly make him sloppy and tardy for no reason? Wong's character randomly becoming a self-parody in the same way Mrs. Stallion was portrayed just sums up the levels of contempt these writers have for their audience. But anyway, I digress. That's the plot and that's your lot. Consider ringing that bell thing so you don't miss episodes 4 to 6 when they drop. Say hello in the comments if you have time, and I'll see you in the next one.
Officer, I got one question for you. What